Talking about the governor's race. Another top national political observer calling the governor's race an essential dead heat. The nonpartisan Center for Politics at the University of Virginia on Thursday moving that race to the toss-up category. It had previously been leans Republican. The center's Larry Sabato writing it may be hard for two down-ticket Democrats to win while Trump has the edge at the top of the ticket. And as things stand, the Senate race in Indiana is more likely to go Democratic than the gubernatorial contest. But all in all, the Greg Holcomb race seems uncertain and too close to favor one side at this point. And let's welcome in the Lieutenant Governor and Republican gubernatorial nominee, Eric Holcomb. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be back with you, Jason.
Good to see you. You've been here plenty of times since, but just last summer, you and I were sitting here talking about your Senate bid at the time. Could you have foreseen what would occur over the past year?
Well, I always say if I'd lie to you about that, I'd lie to you about anything, and I'm not about to start lying about anything. So, you know, you can't always expect or certainly predict when you're called into service, and that's been the story of my life. And I answered a call with Governor Pence to help keep the momentum going here in the state of Indiana, and have just been proud of the 12 years that I've been associated with Indiana's comeback and our acceleration. And so here we are, unprecedented as it may be. We're celebrating our bicentennial. We'll kick that off.
Definitely a busy man these days. Your opponent, Democrat John Gregg, has continually tried to tie you to Governor Mike Pence, specifically in an ad tied to RFRA, specifically saying Eric Holcomb thinks RFRA was the right thing to do. Is that a true statement?
Well, Eric Holcomb is his own guy, and Eric Holcomb wasn't here when RFRA was even passed. So typically when people start to run the grainy black and white television ads, it's because they have to. And what my opponent has found is after running millions and millions of dollars worth of ads, specifically focused on just one issue, he may be running for governor of one issue. I'm running for governor of one state, Indiana.
On the infrastructure front over the past couple of days, subcontractors and contractors have been walking off the job on I-69, claiming that they're simply not getting paid down there.
Sure.
What's the problem? What do you and Governor Pence at this point do to keep that project moving forward?
Well, we hold folks accountable, and that's what we are doing. The IFA, the Indiana Finance Authority, has issued a letter, and we've been here before. The comforting thing is these things have happened in the past, and we've worked through them. We'll work through these issues as well. Folks will get paid for the work that they've done, and there's a process to this, and the state of Indiana is on top of it, and we are dealing with it prudently.
Democrats have been critical of you for not releasing enough specific policy proposals. That's their view, their opinion.
Sure.
Is that a fair criticism of you, and when can we expect more specific policy proposals as we get up to Election Day?
Well, I've been very specific over the last 5 weeks. By the way, I've released some of my policy positions in the first 4 weeks, but I think it's necessary and in fact thoughtful that in the first month of a campaign that you actually listen to people and you seek their input and their area of expertise and their counsel when coming up with your platform. It took my opponent, he's been running for governor for I think 275 weeks when he came out with his latest public safety proposal. It took me less than 4 weeks to start sharing where I am on pre-K and infrastructure programs, and you know, any issue that you think that is important to the state of Indiana. I've been not only listening to folks around the state of Indiana, I've been incorporating those good ideas and building our policy in a month period. And so I feel great where we are, and we're sharing that message all over the state of Indiana. One thing that I always lead with is we need to continue to first and foremost focus on making sure we're spending less than we take in, that we're focused on only passing honestly balanced budgets. If we don't get our economy right, and it is right now, judging if you listen to the experts, the AAA credit rating, etc. If we go back to those days of debt and dysfunction, then the job interest, the creators, they will go away too. They will find somewhere else to risk their capital. So we've got this dialed in right, and that's where I start, because if you get that wrong, it makes everything else, addressing mental illness, addressing the drug epidemic that's killing way too many of us. We need to kill it before it continues to rip our communities and our families apart. We can't do those things. We can't address veterans issues if we don't have the money to do so. So we have to make sure our economy continues to strengthen and diversify. We're not just competing against the rest of the world, we're winning.
We welcomed John Gregg onto the program last week. We gave him this opportunity in 30 seconds or less to that undecided Hoosier voter out there. Why should you become the next governor of Indiana?
Well, I came onto the scene back in 2005 with then Governor Mitch Daniels, and we inherited a mess, and we got real busy cleaning it up. We focused first and foremost on getting the economy dialed in right. We did that. We ushered in investment from all over the world. We no longer were a flyover state. We were a state where people wanted to grow and to raise families and to stay and play. And if you want to continue to have healthy reserves, $2.24 billion in reserves that help us protect that AAA credit rating, that makes it easier on localities all over the state of Indiana in doing their business. If you want to continue down the right track, I would be honored to be your governor. If you want to go back to those days of debt and dysfunction, I'm not your guy.
Mr. Lieutenant Governor, safe travels over the next couple months.
Thank you, Jason,
Thanks for being here. And as you heard there just last week, we sat down with Democratic candidate John Gregg, and you can see that full interview right now on our Indianapolis This Week Facebook page. You also heard the Lieutenant Governor talking about the I-69 project. Our full team has been telling you about this for weeks now. Workers going unpaid for construction on the section from Bloomington to Martinsville. It has reached a boiling point. Those subcontractors walking off the job and the state threatening action against the company overseeing the project. Our TV6 State House reporter Katie Hines is working on that for us.
The possible delays wouldn't be the first in this project, one that has arguably become a political football. We're learning at least one subcontractor has walked off the job, waiting to be paid for work already done on the road. Several others have stopped work or are threatening to do so if they don't see a paycheck soon. A total of more than $9 million is owed. The time frame for completion has already been pushed back once from next month to June 28, 2017. But Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton says it could result in more delays in the project, which means more stop-and-go traffic and orange barrels. The Democrat is blaming Governor Mike Pence, Lieutenant Governor Eric Holcomb, and the entire administration, calling the new problems unacceptable.
There's idle machinery sitting over there, and there are workers at home today who want to be out here working. My view is that the state needs to step up and say, we will promise the payment. We will make the payment. It is taxpayers' money anyway. We have the money. Let the corner offices fight it out later, but let's get the workers back to work building this road so it gets done for everybody.
If there are further roadblocks, you can expect more conversation on the topic leading into the election. Back to you.
Thank you, Katie. And the company in charge of that work is now firing back. Isolux Corsan telling us that a significant amount of blame for delays rests with the state. That includes what the company calls issues with 3 geological and environmental permits that the state has yet to resolve. Company goes on to say for the Indiana Finance Authority to issue a notice of non-performance at the same time it has denied valid claims we have presented is simply misleading and unfair. The work is now scheduled to be done next July, although that is likely to be pushed back again. Back to Indianapolis this week as we turn now to the race for the White House. An extraordinary week for vice presidential nominee Mike Pence, the Indiana governor, receiving his first intelligence briefing on Friday after a week of invoking the memory of Ronald Reagan to convince Republicans that Donald Trump deserves their vote. Our Inez De La Cutera of ABC News has been there for each and every second of it.
That's right, Jason. On the trail, Pence often talks about the first time he met Reagan, how Reagan is the very reason he joined the Republican Party, and he got a bit emotional here. Take a look at these images. He first went to visit the Reagan's grave site with his daughter Charlotte, laying a wreath of white roses there. And then during his speech, Pence heavily focused on the similarities between Trump and Reagan.
The smart set in Washington, D.C. mocked and dismissed that California governor in many ways. He was referred to as a simpleton by some. They said he was little more than a celebrity and an entertainer who entered politics late in life. Sound familiar? Truth be told, initially, Reagan even made some inside the Republican Party uneasy. His rhetoric sounded too strident, too unrefined, and they warned of it. Then the hinge of history began to swing in freedom's direction.
Now, Pence will be down on 9/11, and then he's off to D.C. next week, where he'll be meeting with Republicans in both the House and the Senate. Pence told reporters he's building the relationships needed to get legislation moving through the Hill on day one. Jason?
Inez, thanks so much. And another key moment for Mike Pence this week, appearing on CNN and defending Donald Trump's apparent embrace of Vladimir Putin's authoritarian leadership style.
You personally
with
think that
people on the
Vladimir
world
Putin is a
stage.
stronger leader than the current president?
I think it's inarguable that Vladimir Putin has been a stronger leader in his country than Barack Obama has been in this country. And that's going to change the day that Donald Trump becomes president of the United States of America.
And with that, let's welcome in our political insiders on this Sunday, Democrat Laura Beck. Laura, thanks for being here. And Pete Seed, who we should mention for the Republicans tied to the Holcomb campaign. And let's talk about these comments about Putin. Pete, you worked with Bush 43 in the White House there. Nothing like this ever came up, did it?
No, it's not something that George W. Bush would have ever said. He had some dust-ups with Vladimir Putin and with
But he did thank him for that sweater. When he was, I mean, that was one of my favorites.
Well, you had Putin, arguing that his dog was bigger and better.
I do. I remember that. I do remember that.
But, it's yet another case of Donald Trump's unique way of speaking and contrasting with what he believes, and a lot of Americans believe, is Barack Obama's failed leadership on the world stage. And there are plenty of reasons that we can point to that is a completely accurate assessment, where he's failed in the Middle East. He bows to world leaders, literally bows to other world leaders. And Donald Trump is making that case. A lot of people agree with him. He just has a unique way of doing it.
Trump has made these cases, though, before, and Pence has kind of clarified things that he has said. Is it rare? Is this a sign of things to come that Pence and Trump are now on the same page?
Well, I'm not quite sure how Pete said all that with a straight face, and I'm really proud of him for doing that. You did very well there, defending your nominee. I think with Pence, what we're seeing is that he is in a very unique position, just as he has been all along. And I don't know if this is a sign of the times to come. I actually think Pence probably got a little further out than Trump really was expecting him to go, or anyone really was expecting him to go. But when you think about Donald Trump and Mike Pence praising Vladimir Putin, of all people, for being a strong leader and saying they're a better leader than Barack Obama, it's almost surreal. I mean, if we would have done that as Democrats back in 2008, if we would have done that as Democrats and said Putin was a better leader than George Bush, we would have been excoriated. And so I think it's just fascinating how this campaign is going in that direction, where they are saying these things that are so out there. And it really is almost surreal to see that. It's really unprecedented.
We have 2 months to go to Election Day. Obviously, the big goal at this point, really for everyone.
I think everyone feels that way.
The big goal at this point is those undecided voters in the middle. Can praising Putin, praising Russia, does that sell to the undecided voters at this point, Pete?
You have to assume people are paying attention, number one. And maybe they are. I think a lot of people have, honestly, though, turned off the presidential campaign.
I don't know about that. We've been at this for a long time. I
think, actually, what's more important in that package right before we started talking was that connection to Reagan that Mike Pence is trying to make to people who really long for the days of that type of leadership, and Mike Pence trying to make that connection. Whether they believe it or not is an open question. But trying to make that connection is reaching out to those folks.
I think for somebody like, for people in the middle, Ronald Reagan was probably one of the biggest opponents of the Soviet Union. I mean, when you think about, he called them the evil empire, tear down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev. I mean, he really held the Soviet Union's feet to the fire. So to hear these folks who worship Reagan, such as Mike Pence, and he understandably does, to hear him invoke talking about a Russian leader as stronger than a United States leader, I think is a bit of a turn, and I don't know if voters are really going to see that as something that's sincere and something that they can really wrap their heads around.
We should quickly mention that if you have tuned out from the presidential race, don't tune us out here at Indianapolis.
Yes.
Let's shift gears, and this will be fun because we're going to quickly talk about the governor's race. We heard from Eric Holcomb earlier today that the Democratic criticism being that he hasn't released enough specific policy points to this point. Pete, we mentioned that, of course, you work with Eric Holcomb at this point. Fair criticism, Laura, that he hasn't released more. His defense being that he's essentially been in the race for a month now. He's still out there listening to Hoosiers.
Well, I don't know if that's the best defense that he's got right now. I'm not giving you any free, unsolicited advice. However, he was lieutenant governor before, and he was running for Senate before, and he was state Republican Party chairman. So I would think that he has spent a lot of time out listening to Hoosiers and would have some ideas in terms of policy proposals that he would want to put forth. I mean, if you've been lieutenant governor, governor. Being lieutenant governor is a little bit more than going to ribbon cuttings and making announcements and pronouncements. And same with running for Senate. So I would think that he'd have a few more things to say right now.
And to that point, he did. Pete, the floor is yours.
Yeah. And you're right that he's had different roles, and with each of those roles come different expectations. Federal issues are different than state issues.
They are, but still,
clear.
He was listening to Hoosiers when he was shooting hoops.
What Eric says is absolutely correct. He's been at this for 5, going on 6 weeks now. As he points out, John Gregg didn't get ridiculed for taking 275 weeks to come out with the public safety plan. Thoughtful plans take time. It takes time to listen to people, to put things on paper for how you want to take the state forward for the next 4 years, and that will come. That time will come. He is in a great place. John Gregg was not where Eric Holcomb is today 5 weeks into his campaign.
And that, my friends, is called a successful filibuster by our Pete Seat. We're out of time. Pete, Laura, thank you so much for being here. And welcome back to Indianapolis This Week. We turn our attention now back to Washington, where an Indiana Republican is hoping to change the rules for House GOP members in hopes of simply getting more accomplished. Republican Luke Messer sending this letter to House Republicans this week, hoping to change their internal rules and break deadlock within their own party. I had the chance to catch up with him in his office on Friday morning. Let's first talk about this proposed rule change. What's behind it, and what are your hopes for it?
Well, I'm working with colleagues throughout our caucus to try to give our individual members and the American people a greater voice. A lot of folks feel frozen out of the process. The average American is beginning to feel like they can't change what's happening in Congress. And I think a lot of the reason they feel that way is because they're frozen out of the process and they can't really change what is happening. So we propose a few rules changes that would empower the pen, but really empower the American people. Make it so that when your member comes to Washington, if they have a good idea in legislation, they can bring it. They can force it to come to the House floor. If they have a good idea for an amendment, they can make that amendment in order. And why that's important is because if your member has the ability to actually impact the process, then the 800,000 people we represent, in my case, individual Hoosiers, will have a voice in Washington as well.
What's the problem at this point, though? Why is that not getting done?
Yeah. Today, the rule structure has evolved over a period of decades where the power is consolidated in the very, very top of both caucuses. And frankly, as an individual member, what I've learned in my few years here is often you're just called upon to either rubber stamp what's been put forward by leadership or vote against it. And having come out of a state legislature, I'm a former state representative in Indiana, I've seen that it doesn't have to be that way. An individual member can take input from their constituents and bring a bill forward. We want to open up the process so that's possible even in Washington today.
What's the timeline for this proposal going forward?
Well, our caucus rules will be voted upon in November. So we've got a couple months here to try to persuade my colleagues that we need to change the way we're doing business. My position is if Congress has a 9% approval rating and it's had that kind of rating for multiple years, maybe we ought to shake things up a little bit, and that's what we hope this proposal will do.
Let's quickly talk about Carmel-based ITT Tech now and your proposal to that end. The problem there with that $500 million.
Yeah, I mean, the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, has basically put ITT out of business. Now, tens of thousands of students all across America, many of them Hoosiers in Indiana, are going to be hurt because the energy and effort they put towards their degree isn't going to get them an educational opportunity that gives them a chance for a better paying job. So what I want to find out first is what steps has the Department of Education done to mitigate this process? Can another educational institution potentially pick up the students from ITT and keep those students on track? Secondly, what can we do for veterans who are particularly harmed by this? Because ITT had tens of thousands of veterans as part of their program. Many of those veterans get the GI Bill, which is grants that are provided to veterans for their service. Once those grants are spent, the veteran doesn't get another bite at the apple. And I feel like if they've spent their money on a failing school that it was not their fault the school failed, we ought to try to figure out a way to give these veterans an opportunity to have the GI Bill dollars so that they can pursue a degree that gives them a chance to better their life.
Congressman, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for checking in.
Always great to talk to you. Thanks.